dwellers, we often feel detached from where our food is grown. We've grown accustomed to a concrete environment, bustling avenues, and crowded neighborhoods. We rely on a seemingly invisible network of food producers, regulators, transporters, and retailers to sustain our complex society. But is there one piece of the puzzle that is essential to this intricate system that may be right in your neighborhood? Are we less detached than we think? Honeybees are a fundamental component of the agricultural process that we so often overlook, so much so that urban beekeeping seems impractical to many. In truth, urban bees play an important role in providing ecosystem services and stability to a vulnerable species. Honeybees produce beeswax and propolis, which have multiple applications for humans, such as soap, cosmetics, and nutritional supplements. They also provide honey, a natural sweetener that has beneficial properties. Most importantly, honeybees efficiently pollinate wide varieties of vegetation, which is an essential activity for growing flowers, trees, grapes, and other plants. So why are honeybees vulnerable? Colony collapse disorder is the wide-scale disappearance of worker bees from hives across the developed world. To learn more about colony collapse disorder, we spoke with local urban beekeeper Nathan Clark of Mad Urban Bees.
In my opinion, it's caused primarily by how we do agriculture in this country. So it's the use of monoculture, it's the use of the chemicals we need to treat those monocultures, and it's then the transportation of bees as pollinators around the country in order to pollinate those monocultures. Monocultures, when you have one plant that's pretty much cloned. When you see a field of corn, those are pretty much almost entirely clones of each other. And that means that there's also only one kind of food.
The next contributing factor to colony collapse disorder is the application of pesticides via spraying, soaking seeds, or genetic modification of the plants themselves. This means the chemicals can be found in the roots, stems, flowers, and most importantly, the nectar and pollen of the plants, which the honeybees consume for food.
And one of the things that honeybees do is they take nectar and pollen, bring it back to their hive, and especially with the nectar, they concentrate it. So the levels of the pesticide that are on the plants starts increasing when it gets into the hive. And part of the problem is this is a neurotoxin for insects, and so it affects the brood. It affects the gestating bees, the baby bees, as it were. The other aspect is the transportation of bees around the country. And these large-scale pollinators, as they bring the bees around, they put these big pallets of bees up on top of trucks and transport them all around the country.
So what happens if bee populations get so low they can no longer provide these ecosystem services?
We're getting close to a point where we're going to start losing crops because we don't have enough honeybees.
An example of this is the almond crop in California, which produces 85% of the world's almonds, a multi-billion-dollar industry. Honeybees are transported from afar to help pollinate the crop because local bees cannot keep up.
We could hit a point where bees are no longer able to pollinate on a large-scale commercial level.
In some areas of China, bee populations have been effectively eliminated by extreme use of pesticides, requiring farmers to pollinate their crops by hand.
And where we're going to see that is in our grocery stores. Suddenly, we're not going to have local apples. We're not going to have, local fruits, squash, berries, and that sort of thing.
Not only does our dependence on monocultures contribute directly to colony collapse disorder, but there are other economic and geopolitical factors that add to the difficulties honeybees are facing. One significant challenge is in honey laundering.
Honey laundering is the illegal importation of Chinese honey into this country. The United States put a large tariff on Chinese honey.
This tariff, enacted by Congress in 2002 at a rate of 150% of the honey's value, was meant to protect U.S. beekeepers from the competition of cheap foreign honey. In response, China shifted their exports to Indonesia, India, and Vietnam, who then sold the honey to the U.S. to avoid this trade restriction.
The problem with a lot of that is the honey that is coming in isn't necessarily actually honey. They mask the honey by removing pollen from the honey from China.
One of the unique characteristics of honey is that when placed under the microscope, one can determine its origin by the pollen that it contains. To mask this fingerprint, the honey is superheated and ran through ceramic nanofilters to remove pollen. However, this process also removes the beneficial properties of the honey.
But the other problem is sometimes that honey is also adulterated. And adulterated honey means that it's been watered down, so they've added water to it. They've added corn syrup, rice syrup, malt syrup. Drums show up on our shores that say honey when there's really just corn syrup.
Recently, one of the largest honey distributors in the United States pled guilty to honey laundering and was forced to pay a $3 million fine. So what are U.S. policymakers doing to protect domestic honey producers and the quality of honey for consumers?
One of the problems is the FDA does not actually have a solid definition of honey. Both Republicans and Democrats have tried in the past to get the FDA to say, this is honey, and they have not.
Are there other organizations that are effective in fighting colony collapse disorder?
American Beekeepers Association already has something in place. It's a small survey that is voluntarily taken every year, and it keeps track of percentage loss for the U.S. I think last year it was around 50 or 60% total loss of all bees in the country.
What can be done?
Long term, we need more biodynamic farms. And a biodynamic farm is a farm that is raising multiple crops that benefit each other. So it's not necessarily having, square miles of the countryside with just one crop. I think there are short-term solutions by having, the farmers researching a little bit more what they are putting onto their crops.
Another simple solution would be to plant wildflowers between crop rows to give hives greater diversity and food selection.
For beekeeping, I'm keeping bees in the city. I mean, that's one of the things that I do is all my beehives are located within the city, and the bees aren't exposed to the same chemicals and not nearly on the same scale as they would be in a large-scale agriculture situation.
For commercial beekeepers, the solution is a bit more complex than simply having the option to choose who your clients are for pollination.
For commercial beekeepers, if they actually start, really trying to talk with the people who are doing the pollination, saying, hey, if we keep these practices up, it's going to keep getting more and more expensive for me to pollinate your crop. If we start shifting the practices now, it's going to be cost effective for both of us.
What can consumers do to help combat colony collapse disorder?
The biggest thing you can do to combat colony collapse, buy local. Buy, honey from your farmer's market, buy local fruits and vegetables, vote with your wallet.